Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, your resource for all things business, brand, and leadership. We are excited you have decided to join us today.
What an honor to be on the podcast again, you guys. I'm Robert Kalin here with my friend Mike Newman, and we are talking about when do you know, or how do you know when you need to shift or make a pivot? And I want to share something with you guys really quick that just happened. So we had just recorded about 2 minutes of this podcast, and I hadn't hit the record button. And so I had to stop everything and say, hey, we need to pivot right now and redo this because I totally made a mistake here. And so sometimes in life, it's really easy for us to know when we need to take a pause and shift things. Other times it's not so easy. I'm really excited for our guest today, very special guest. I'm going to let you, Mike, introduce her because I know that you guys go way back. And go ahead and take it.
All right. Well, it's an honor and privilege for me to talk about my good friend, Jan McDonald. Jan is been one of those people who come in your life at a certain time and help move you in a particular direction. I had the honor of working with Jan, coaching her, coaching me coaching her a number of years ago when we were both starting off on our new adventure in the world of Maxwell leadership, and just excited that Jan's able to join us today. Jan is now the owner of her business, Jan McDonald LLC, easy one to remember. Jan is a speaker, a trainer, and a coach with Maxwell Leadership, and she's written a book called Fruitful Leadership, Leading by the Fruit of the Spirit. And so God puts people in our life, and I cannot thank God enough for the opportunities that I've had to work with Jan, and welcome Jan to our podcast today.
Hey, welcome, Jan.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Jan, can you give us a little bit of background on, because I wanted to save this until you came on so we get it all right, but you and I started working together back when you were the CEO of Life Options, and I was still working for the school district, and we were both kind of thinking about transitions, and yours was a little different than mine. And I'd like for you to just kind of talk about, what led you into the world of Life Options, and then why you eventually decided it was time to step away.
I started at Life Options as a volunteer, and I didn't know anything about Life Options at all, but our church at that time supported it. And I was dragged to a banquet one night, and they were talking about healthy relationship training that they did in the schools. And I just thought, if I could just prevent one student from going down my path of, drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, and all that, then all the mistakes I made in my life would be worth it. And so I went down and began to volunteer. And I volunteered probably for about a year, and then they offered me a job. And when they told me to come in and chat with them, I thought, oh no, my presentation in the school got a little R-rated. They're gonna fire me. Well, they wanted me to work for them. So I came to work for them, and then 2004, after a couple of CEO shifts, I took over. I had no clue what I was doing, none. And I figured if I was going to be leading an organization, then I better figure out what it was supposed to look like to lead. So I started self-development by reading all sorts of leadership books. And I think that is what helped me lead that organization and grow that organization. So that's how I got there.
Okay, so you're in this, and you have this opportunity now. You're discovering more about leadership as you go through. You're probably having some challenges that come with leadership around staff and staffing and funding as a nonprofit. Talk to us a little bit about some of those challenges maybe that you have.
I think maybe the big challenge to begin with is me, because I didn't know what I was doing. But as I developed my leadership skills, the organization started to grow. Because I started to grow, the organization started to grow. And when my influence rose, my influence of the people that were part of Life Options grew. And so we attracted better and more stable employees. We attracted better and more gifted and people with more money, more influence. So the funding went up. So by 2010, we didn't have to have a problem. We had enough funding that just cruised us all through the year. And so what actually changed that, and we grew from nothing. We were just this little tiny pregnancy center to by 2011, we had 2 full-fledged medical buildings. And then in 2012, someone had gifted us with a mobile unit. So we launched a mobile center that served the whole valley. And I'd like to take all the credit for it, but no, it was God. God was working in the background, and he just really brought the funding up. And I've been pouring my life into that. And in 2000, I think it was 2010, we had a summer slump, and and I was having challenges with employees. And I was praying. I felt like my prayers were not getting answered, and I would go home and work with my phone on like games, or I would watch the news or something like that, rather than grow myself. And so it has to get really painful for me when I'm going to do something change. So I went into my office because it got really painful, and I pulled out John Maxwell's book on the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And there I was in the law of the lid. I had stopped growing. And so the organization had stopped growing. And that's why I was having challenges with my employees as well.
And so, that's really interesting, Jan, that I hope our listeners caught that about when you were growing yourself before you knew what you needed to know that you needed to know so you could do what you needed to do. You were growing yourself and your organization was growing. But then when you stopped growing, then the organization stopped growing, and then you started having problems. So continue on with where you were with once you started reading Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. What happened after that?
Well, that was me. That I was in the first chapter. I thought, oh my gosh, this is me. So I grabbed that book and took it to bed, read it all weekend long, and then went in and I started more implementing what he said in that book. And Summer Slump went away. I started becoming a better leader. A part of my challenge was that I was a control freak. Well, okay, I'm still struggling a little bit with that.
Recovering one.
I was a control freak, and so I was a micromanager, and I just couldn't envision more. I couldn't do the job of the CEO. And so what I started to do is I started to give my staff, I started to delegate. At first they thought I was drinking again. What happened to my control freak boss? But no, I started to give them more responsibility, and they knew what I expected. So when they would come up and ask me a question, I would say, well, what do you think I would do? And they would go, well, you would. Yeah, so go do that. So after a while, they knew exactly what was expected of them. And I got to go back to what I loved the most, which was development, working on relationships with financial partners and envisioning what more we could do. And so I think it was in 2014 or 15, I'm not sure. I went down to help my daughter for 10 days. She had hip surgery, and I was gone for 10 days. I didn't get one phone call, not one phone call. And when I got back, there were some big challenges that they had, but they handled them, and they handled them perfectly. I knew I was not needed anymore. And right before then, I started to get this sense that there was more for my life. I just didn't know what it was. But I knew that I felt that God was transitioning me out, but I wasn't sure what that was. And so in 2015, I think it was October of 2015, I started seeing all these John Maxwell things pop up on my Facebook page. You know how that happens when you start talking about stuff, comes up on your Facebook page. So I called down there and asked Eric, well, what is this all about? And I just knew that this was something that I wanted to look at, but it was pretty expensive. And so I went. And when I got down to be certified as a coach, speaker, and trainer, I knew that was what God was calling me to do. Mm. But he wasn't letting me loose yet. And so he kept telling me, do both, do both, do both. You could build your business on the side and you can still lead life options. And so in October of 2017, I paid for a very expensive coach. I paid the president of the John Maxwell team to coach me through this, just to get my head on straight as to what I thought I needed to do. And he said, what have you done so far? And so I told him what I'd done so far. And he looked at what I built at Life Options. And he said, if you can do that in Grandview, Washington, which is really small, then you can build your own business. And he said one thing at the very end, because, I thought maybe I could stay at Life Options, maybe I could stay as the development director. They didn't have one. Maybe I could do, both, because I'd have that little security of having an income. And then while I built my other business, he said something at the end. He said, Jan, when you've poured your life into something for years and you're thinking of transitioning out, but you want to keep one foot in, sometimes that totally hinders you from moving forward. And that's all I'm saying for that, and the session was over. So I got to thinking about that for a long time. So that was, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so you decided that you were at a point, and this is where I think for our listeners is really key too, that sometimes we have all these thoughts in our heads about what we need to do and when we need to do it and what steps we need to take. But sometimes we need an impartial outside voice.
Yeah.
And so you went and got one of the best in Paul Martinelli to work with you. As you said, it was very expensive, but that investment that you made in yourself really set you down a different direction, a different path.
Yeah.
And what I caught that you said there that Paul gave you some advice on, and we didn't use Paul's name, but he's also a good mentor of mine, so I knew who you were talking about. Yeah. That you can't keep one foot in something that you've developed and still move forward in another direction. Those weren't the exact words that you said, but I think about so often that we try to stay where, it's comfortable when we need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. So as you made that decision to move forward, Jan, what were some of the uncomfortable things that you had to face as you were stepping away?
Where do I start?
Maybe the top 2 or 3.
Okay, so one of the things that I had begun doing in 2016, Life Options got a grant from the Murdoch Foundation to do board training. And I knew right then that was the last thing we needed, because I had developed leaders from within the organization. They obviously didn't need me anymore. But I didn't want to leave the organization in a way that would prevent them from not thriving and moving forward. I poured myself into that. I wanted, what John always says, you've got to leave a legacy. Well, I wanted to leave a legacy. So I knew if the board got trained by the Murdoch Foundation, for Pete's sake, that they would be trained well. And so that was the beginning of March of 2017, I believe. And I had written my own succession plan, but part of that training was for the board to come up with a succession plan. And so they wrote a succession plan that was approved by the board in December of 2017. And so I knew now that we had a fully functioning board, and they weren't yes men, because I didn't want yes men as board members, because Mike, I could be very dominating, and I didn't want to bulldoze. I wanted somebody to call me if I was, moving forward too fast or doing something that was not in the best interest of Life Options. So I knew that was the last, I guess, last nail that needed to be in place. And so I hadn't mentioned anything to the board. And when I mentioned it to my husband back in, I think it was September, October of that year, he said, "Oh my God, we're going to have to sell the house. I'm like, Dennis, do you think that after seeing what I can do with Life Options, do you think that I'm not going to do this with my own personal business?" "I don't know. This is so," anyway, so he was kind of scared. And of course, because that would be security is his worst fear, his greatest fear as a disc profile. So in 2018, January, the beginning of 2018, I was strategic planning, getting ready to do the strategic plan. And I was praying that morning and I said, "Okay, God, I've been doing both for 3 years and I'm totally willing to continue doing both forever. But you know that my passion for what I'm doing and for your work at Life Options is not what it used to be. And I don't feel that's fair to you. And I don't feel that's fair to the staff." And he said, "You can go. I'm cutting you loose." And I was like, so I did that strategic planning full well knowing that was going to be my last strategic planning I was going to do for them unless they paid me to do it in the future. And I went to the board and told them that I went to the board chair and told him that I was going to give my notice at the end of January. And they were furious. They were not happy. They were not happy that they didn't know that I'd been feeling like this. Well, I didn't want them to know because I didn't want them to look at my performance as, "Oh, she's leaving." And that wasn't I was going to finish well because that's who I am. And so they were not happy. And a couple of things happened as I was transitioning out that I had not expected. And I'm not sure I want to share. It just didn't go at all the way I had planned. And so I had picked someone who I thought would be the leader. And I had talked to her at length before I even gave my notice. And she said, "I probably could do it. So she asked her husband, and her husband said, "You'd be crazy not to try." And so when she decided that she would take my place, I took her to the next board meeting in February. And I was in there just for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. And they said, "Okay, you can go now." And so I left the board meeting. And then I got a text that said, "We're going to give you 2 weeks and you can go." And so I thought, I was going to leave in June. 2 weeks, my goodness sakes. How could I train her in 2 weeks, number one, especially because I was going to be gone to the IMC, followed by being gone with the team of people that they sent to Costa Rica. And we had a huge fundraiser coming up in April, and they were going to just let me go just like that. So I didn't answer that text because I just didn't feel like answering the text. I didn't know what to say. I just didn't know what to say. So I got a text the next morning that said, "I think we might have jumped the gun here." And so I told them, "Good call. What can I do? And how can I transition out the way that the succession plan is written?" And they'd forgotten about that. They'd forgotten what we planned because, their emotions kind of took over. And I transitioned out, and my last day was in June of 2018.
That's amazing. When I hear your story and I hear about, the fear at home with your husband and his insecurity and you starting your own business and really starting all over again. And then I hear about how the board reacted, right? Where they got furious, they got upset about you saying that you're going to leave. I'm sure that created some tension inside of you in a big way. And, I think about the wisdom that you had to fall back on the plan and take the emotion kind of out of it and finish really strong is it's admirable, number one. But I think also just understanding that when you approach the board and put your notice in, they went through a grieving process. I mean, all of them were just like, oh, now we've got change and we've got to deal with this. And the emotions went really high. Your ability to just like, okay, I'm not even going to respond to that text. We'll let this kind of take its course and see how God kind of works it out. It's pretty cool. It's a great story.
Well, what I forgot to share is as I was building my business for 2 years, I put the money that I had made on the side into an account. And I had 3 months of income set there. And when I told Paul that I had 3 months of income, set in there, he said, well, do you think you can do it in 3 months? I'm like, yeah. Well, it took a little bit longer than 3 months, but yeah. And, I had God's approval. I didn't need anyone else's approval at that particular point in my life. He was the only one whose approval I needed, and he knew what we'd been planning together. And so whether the board was ready or not, or whether anyone else was ready or not, I knew that God and I were ready. And that was all that mattered. And I knew that Life Options was ready, and they are thriving. Still, they are thriving.
Yeah, it's a groundwork that you set as a leader, and following your heart and following the, your internal compass that you have, the faith that you have, Jan, that makes you such an incredible leader. And I hope that our listeners today hear the heart and the passion that you have for the work that you did and the work that you continue to do. We'd love to have you back again sometime. I mean, our time has gone by so quickly. If we can have you back again, we'd love to have you back. Robert, any closing thoughts before we wrap up today?
I think my closing thought is very similar to what yours is. I hope that our listeners take Jan's experience. They're able to kind of pull out those nuggets of like when things happen, relying on your faith, relying on what God is revealing to you, and standing on that and saying, you know what, if I'm called to this, God's going to be faithful to provide for it in the most miraculous ways, right? Even if it takes longer than the 3 months that you plan for, he always provides a way. And so that's kind of my closing thought for today. Jan, you got anything else that our listeners may need from you? Maybe how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to mention that not enough people take advantage of a coach in situations when they need them. I know up here by myself, that's kind of like the worst place that I could possibly be, alone. So I needed that feedback, and I needed that affirmation. And I knew that Paul was going to say, you're not ready, if I was not ready. And so take advantage of a coach that's in your life when you're coming up with situations that you're not quite sure how to handle. That would be what I would say.
That's
and
great.
Then you can get a hold of me anywhere on LinkedIn, on social media. My favorite place to connect with people is Jan McDonald on Facebook. And I've also been writing on Medium, so you can find some of my stuff on Medium as well.
That's awesome. Well, Jan, it's been a pleasure getting to know you today. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to another conversation with you at some point. And you guys, for all of you out there, we love you. We hope that you have taken something away from this that will help build your business, build your faith, build your brand. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Till then, take care.
Thank you for joining us. Our hope is this episode has been helpful for you today. If it's impacted you in some way, we encourage you to share it with someone. To receive a direct notification of our next episode, click the follow button on your favorite app or platform. You can also watch each episode on YouTube. The links are in the description. If you want to connect with us on a deeper level, go to countercultureleadership.com/resources. We'll see you next week on the Elevate Podcast.